It is the final day of South by Southwest EDU 2023. First thing in the morning here, so we've got folks in the audience here, and excited to have a wide-ranging conversation around right-sizing the university, which is sort of the journey I think a lot of institutions are going to have to be embarking on, balancing their physical assets and digital infrastructure. How can they sort of have those two things working well together with lean teams as they're embarking towards the hybrid frontier, as I've started to call it, that I think is just going to be kind of the new normal, balancing physical spaces and instruction and digital communities and all sorts of things. So we'll cover as much as we can in the time that we have, and I'll try to give a few minutes at the end for questions as well. So we have the microphones; folks can hop up to those or just shout them out once we get to that point. My name is Dustin Ramsdell. I am the creator and host of the Hired Geek podcast. I've been doing it for over 5 years. Been a hired professional for almost 10, and did a different podcast before this one. So I've been podcasting for most of that time as well, just talking with folks about the trends affecting higher education. So I love doing this stuff. I love being here. We'll go to you, Kelvin, and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Kelvin Bentley. I serve as a consulting manager with what is called WGU Labs, affiliated with Western Governors University. We are part research and development shop. We also have a business accelerator, so I work on the accelerator side of things, working with early stage ed tech companies that are interested in making a social impact within the higher ed space. My background is that I have roughly 22 or 23 years of experience in higher ed, mostly overseeing online learning programs for 2-year and 4-year universities. And we're glad that you're here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sierra Hamagishi. I'm a senior partnerships manager focused on education at a company called Unity Technologies. If you don't know Unity, it's a game engine that allows people to make 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional video games, but there's a lot of education use cases. If there's headsets, a lot of those VR experiences are made with Unity. In the augmented reality world, Pokemon Go, that's another use case. And there's lots of others in construction, architecture, or film virtual production. Don't worry, I won't get super technical. My background's more in partnerships, so I work with educational institutions or organizations that are looking at helping students have the skills to use this technology, with a special focus on underrepresented creators getting equitable access. And my background is in a lot of marketing, admissions, international ed, and a lot in the boot camp space as well, doing partnerships. So looking forward to chatting today.
My favorite part about Unity is now a lot of the movies are being made. So it's like you have the actor with the live movie behind them. So instead of a green screen, you actually know what you're acting in. So there's some great articles on that I encourage you to read. I'm Matt Tower. I have been around the education technology space for a while, first as an operator at a startup, then at one of the big publishers, and then as an investor for the past kind of 4 or 5 years. And I recently went independent and started writing my own newsletter, which focuses again on the kind of funding and M&A in the ed tech space. So I watch this university angle from more of the business side, but learned a lot from these guys.
Very much appreciate your perspective in your newsletter. We should go subscribe. And the podcast, of course. But
that's very good.
So we'll start with you, Matt, kind of with some context building. We'll kind of, I think, run down the line here for everyone to give a little bit of input. But from your perspective, what are the factors that are affecting institutions right now that are causing them to need to right size? I think that there has been so much that's been going on over the past 3 years, and certainly even before that, of just digital education becoming more ascendant and normalized. But if you want to just speak to sort of the context that we're in. Yeah,
and I think unsurprisingly, my focus is kind of how the financial side has been affected. And I think over the past kind of 3 years, we had this trend. We had like all hands on deck. We got to go digital. Whatever it costs, and we'll figure out how to pay for it later. And I think over the past kind of 12 months, we've started to move towards, we can't just kind of blanket pay for digital stuff. We have to think about, we have a finite set of resources. We have a large physical plant in a lot of universities' cases. And yet, we also want to be able to serve our students in the way they want to be served, and often that means digital. And that varies across demographics. So if you're a school that serves lots of demographics, it's even more complex. Good luck. But I think all of a sudden you go from we have to figure it, we're just going to pay for it, we have to do this, to we're back to a budget, and the budget now has to cover both the physical and the digital. How do we allocate our resources? And I think it's really complex. So that's what I'm watching.
Yeah, well, and it's not made any easier by just sort of like enrollment challenges and that, I think a lot of people kind of dogpiled on wanting to be the next sort of XYZ University Global or something, and just sort of being like, well, that'll just solve all our problems, right? It's like, maybe, but you have to, invest in all the digital infrastructure to support those students and build all the content and all those sort of things. And I know that's a little bit of your perspective, Sierra, of how are we teaching these things, balancing sort of physical space and digital tools and all those other trends, so.
Exactly. And I won't go into any more macroeconomic conditions, but I think that there is some opportunity not being the everything for everyone or going hard in everything digital or technology, but looking at specifically where there is an opportunity for differentiation. I know for some schools that didn't have the elite name or didn't have the geography, I've seen them look at a sub area. So maybe they are getting into having an XR innovation lab, and they went from a school, to be honest, a lot of people outside of that very local area would not have heard of them. And now within a space, either to students wanting to learn that skill or even to industry partners being like, oh, okay, wow, they're doing something pretty emerging. And it's not necessarily just the elite institutions that are doing that. It's some other people that are grabbing this kind of white space where all the major players aren't identified. So again, not trying to do that everywhere, but maybe if you find your own little sub-niche that makes sense with the existing resources or the existing programs your school has, I've seen some pretty successful examples there.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because I think institutions have that sort of impulse economically to sort of just try to mirror and mimic each other. So differentiation being really important, and that because it makes you think sometimes if it's just they say hey, look, we have a 3D printer or something. And it's then they're just doing it and they're saying that because it's we joined the club, we joined the bandwagon. But it's if you really focus and invest in a particular thing and you build up, subject matter expertise and everything, then that's how you differentiate. People are I want to go there because they, have a great XR lab or something, and those sort of things. But I guess on that point too, Kelvin, when we were kind of prepping, some of just the broader technological shifts that are sort of informing this context, where I think there's no shortage of new, shiny tools and things, and that we've had to, obviously adapt and implement over the past 3 years, and now sort of getting above water and sort of being okay, where are we? Where do we want to go? And just how we sort of navigate that in some of the context right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as I said earlier in my intro, I had a chance years ago to kind of start managing online learning programs. So I remember working for a school in Pennsylvania, around 2006, which had tons of online course options for students, even back then, and online programs, but they lacked a lot of the wraparound services, right? So, which kind of breaks the model, because when you are, expected to be an online student, you think everything will be online. But this particular school still told students you had to come to campus for tutoring services. You had to still come to campus for proctoring. And I almost feel like now that we're post-COVID, as Matt mentioned, we have thrown a lot of technology. We threw a lot of technology at the problem of students not coming to campus. But now we have to kind of strategically figure out, okay, what technologies, and I think I said this even last year, what types of data, what do we want to know about the student experience, given that we have thrown technology at students, Zoom, the learning management systems, adaptive learning tools. I think the student voice is still missing in a lot of that. Again, we have end of the course surveys, but I think we need to do a better job of really just asking students in general, what is the student experience like, given that we are maybe doubling down on digital, or to Matt's point, what is the student experience now, given the fact that we're retracting, right? So are we losing the ability to maybe connect with our students because we are trying to save a buck in terms of, maybe not spending what we need to, but I bring this up because I'm afraid that we will just kind of continue with business as usual. We'll continue to say, hey, we have all these online programs, but we're not going to invest in other things. Because the wraparound services, and this is one of the things that I've always loved about WGU, they strongly believe in a culture of care, right? And I think more and more schools need to really look at the student holistically, whether they take a course online or face-to-face. The modality shouldn't matter, but we should have an appropriate adoption of technologies where we're not breaking the bank, but we're also finding the best ways to support our students. And that takes a bigger conversation. It's not just looking at your Excel spreadsheet to figure out what you're spending, but really asking students, what is your life like? Is it better? Is it worse? What other things could we be doing through technology and people to help you be successful in courses, and also balancing the craziness of your life outside of school, which I think we don't always do a great job of figuring out what is going on with a student outside of the courses that they're taking. So
I think just like to build on that a little bit, there's a stat in the K-12 world where we have somehow lost like 3 million students, and it's like particularly interesting that we're choosing the word lost, which makes it really stark and like kind of shocking to read. I don't think we have a comparable stat in the higher ed world, because obviously it's a different population, it's not mandatory, et cetera. But I think what it makes me think of, Kelvin, in terms of the wraparound services, you can have digital programs that still need physical wraparound services. And I know WGU is online only, but I think that's where, again, this like hybrid university is interesting to me, where I know there are like executive education programs where they have you come in like a weekend a month. Right. And I'm curious if that will kind of disperse out into other types of programs. Obviously, it's easier if you're an executive at a company to like afford a flight to a school, but I think there is like a really important place for, like, even if it's once a week or once a month. I think what I'm looking for is schools who are like, yeah, we actually looked at this and we tested once a week, twice a week, once a month, et cetera. And we found that the highest impact way to bring people together in person was X. So that's data I haven't seen. I really want it, because I think it articulates that it's not just digital and it's not just in person, but we found the kind of sweet spot.
Let's play a game. What keywords does your website rank for? What doesn't it rank for that you think it should? What are a few opportunities you could be winning on if you tweaked some website copy? Okay, how'd you do? Not great? That's okay. Because our friends at DD Agency want to answer all of those questions for you and then some. DD Agency is a higher ed specific marketing technology agency that has conducted countless SEO audits for colleges and universities across the country. In these audits, they detail where you currently rank, what you could be ranking for, exactly how copy should be tweaked on website pages, and much more. If this sounds like something you could benefit from, give those folks a ping and be sure to mention that Enrollify sent you to claim a 10% discount on any of their SEO offerings. Head on over to enrollify.org/DDASEO or simply follow the link in the show notes below. That will guarantee you a 10% discount off of your audit. Again, head on over to enrollify.org/DDASEO to learn more. Now, on to the show.
Yeah, that's always my sort of like, North Star, I guess, is like, how can you get the best of both worlds? Like, I think hybrid is, the greatest has the greatest potential and opportunity to create positive student outcomes when you like look at it really intentionally like that, of like, okay, an immersive weekend for these students to do something like builds community, builds their network of colleagues, and can have some really great hands-on learning opportunities. But then it's like, we can actually teach this maybe as good or better via like online courses or something, but we still honor the importance and value of that physical community. And I think that's part of the right sizing, is you kind of have to like get into the weeds and kind of get wonky with like, okay, each program, each course, and those sort of things, and start to kind of interrogate and kind of interface with like, how do we want to teach each of the concepts, and kind of keep that sort of continuous improvement cycle to understand like, okay, well, I guess if we're doing this way, then this is the needs we have for physical space, or the types of physical spaces, and those sort of things. So, and that's what I wanted to get to next, was the idea of how are you leveraging those physical assets, because I've seen some really good examples of like, I'll just give them a shout out, my alma mater, University of Delaware.
That's mine too.
Well, yeah, that is right. So, I mean, two great people here from a great institution.
Go Blue Hens.
Yeah, go Blue Hens. And they had an old computer lab and converted it into an esports arena. And I've seen a lot of institutions do that, where it's like already kind of networked for that, and it just kind of adapts more to student demands. That's a space that can be a learning space, a community space, and just something, again, to kind of differentiate and sort of put themselves out there in a really kind of bold and exciting way. So we'll start with you, Sierra, on this one, of just any sort of things like that that you've seen, or just ideas that you have sort of to kind of rethink spaces that are going like underutilized, or that would sort of be able to be used more intentionally.
No, for sure. And I'll back up what you said. I think even this week I was at a couple immersive learning sessions, and the educational technologists and the IT reps were saying that like 8 to 8, like if you can use the lab from 8 to 8, they're like, we're getting the rationale to make the capital expenditure cost. So heard that a little bit more this week. I think the common themes to look at where I've seen the most success, and again, my lens is from how this could be utilized for tech as well, because that's what I see a lot day to day, but how the space could be utilized as multi-purpose, or if you're making those technical investments for the space, like whether that's headsets or labs or something else, how they can be used for multiple stakeholders. And the easiest way, or not easiest, but the way that I've seen it more successful and where that's done cohesively is when there is perhaps a makerspace, an innovation center, or kind of, it could even be a library, like a natural common space that's there, but how they have utilized that to have a lot of areas come together to serve the school, to serve the community, to serve specific courses that are looking to integrate that technology, or even students that are curious. A great local example, Texas State University has their ALCAC 1 center. If you guys don't know about it, I'd look into it. They have like every kind of technology that you can imagine there for the students to play around with. And how they made that possible, if you're looking for those breadcrumbs, they were able to look into a lot of grant funding. There's a lot of tech-specific grant funding, or even grant matching. I know it's like NASA, Science Foundation in Texas. And so they were able to look at the kind of the state level, as well as corporate grants, and then they were able to get matching for those corporate grants to kind of make some of that possible. So I think multi-purpose, multiple stakeholders, and then getting really creative of the funding doors that open, or the opportunities that are there. If you choose, I think my earlier point, differentiation, choose the spaces where industry or government is saying there's a bit of a focus, it's not going to hurt.
Well, and like those funding opportunities are there for a reason, I think, because it's just like we need more people that know how to use these tools, and so they're just trying to pull the levers that they can. It's like, all right, let's make ourselves available and adapt to space with that sort of support and everything, and not go it alone, because I think it's just like we can all kind of reach higher levels of success working together in those ways. So I don't know if anybody else sort of like rethinking physical spaces, because I think it's even just sometimes acknowledging that like maybe we just don't need all the space we had anymore, because when we have faculty and staff working from home, all the time or part of the time, or obviously more and more like online or hybrid students or commuter students and those sort of things. Just any thoughts on physical space?
I mean, I think the one funny thing I read from the workforce world the other day is that the artist formerly known as Facebook, now Meta, is investing in cubicles. They're like 21st century cubicles, but they were like, we now have a lot more people coming back, so we've kind of redesigned this space that can be private in an office. So I think there's probably going to be some like what's old is new again type things, where it's like, oh yeah, actually we probably do need a dedicated space for X, a dedicated space for Y, but hopefully we'll do it in some fun and different ways.
That's something I love seeing, is when some like tech funders or investors or whatever, founders are just like, coming up with something. It's like, you just invented a library. It's like, what if everybody just like brought their books to one place and they could borrow them and bring them back, and like they think it's just like they discovered. It's like, I mean, yeah, you can maybe do it differently, like with an app or whatever, but yeah. I don't know, Kelvin, if there's like any thoughts, physical space.
No, I mean, as all of you were talking about, WGU doesn't really have a physical space in the traditional sense, but this conversation has had me thinking about maybe there's like a future article about, maybe the title is "We Work You," right? Because I think in some ways there is a need for, a location for people to meet up and to share ideas. I was just having breakfast with my colleague Nick, who's here. Hey, Nick. And we were talking too about how, even at a conference like this, it's great to network, right? And then to follow up and have maybe opportunities to even network with people outside of the immediacy of the conference. And given that internships and apprenticeships are starting to really take off and become hotter and very popular, I just wonder if the physical space is not really campus space. Hopefully we're going to double down on providing, opportunities for people to network as they are on these internships, or maybe similar organizations can actually like host convenings where lessons learned could be had across different students working for different employers, because I think that networking doesn't always happen. Again, that social capital is still kind of left to the individual to actually partake in. But if employers can maybe support that along with universities, I think that would be very cool to see.
Yeah. Because I was on the show floor, and I think ASU has something that they're kind of playing around with on that. And I've geeked out when I've talked to people about the potential of something like that, of like, especially just with the wide availability of like co-working spaces and stuff. It's like if they could be leveraged, because people are sort of like, acclimated to the idea, like, oh no, this is a place where you could just pop in, you could book a room or do whatever you need to, and leveraging that sort of, type of space for those sort of things where it's like, not on being like, well, hey, yeah, I mean, you're an individual student. If you want to go there, go there. Like, it could be like, no, as an institution, like, we are going to work with them to set up something where it's like once a month, we're getting people together to like, even just lightly facilitate and structure that. Because I think, that social capital and building your network and all that is especially important, for first-gen students and all that. So I think trying to, again, show that level of care, like you were talking about, like that can be a way to work towards that. And it's kind of interesting where it's like coming from an institution that's completely online, if it's still just like, there's like a little bit of yearning of like, oh, it'd be nice to have like a little bit of space to like, whether it's our team coming together or like getting students together. So with all that though, I think that, there's obviously no shortage of great organizations and companies out there that are making really great digital innovations and tools and platforms to kind of supplement and augment the campus experience and everything. So I guess we can kind of go back down this way. We'll start with you, Calvin, kind of go down the line. The way that I wanted to frame this is like the digital innovations that you see that are really helping staff kind of push greater efficiency, greater quality and everything, because I think that's, again, where you're seeing the hybrid, the right sizing is that, increasingly I think there's going to need to be leaner teams. Institutions are struggling with retention, and, it's almost like we need to invest in the quality of life of faculty and staff as they're working with students. So what are things that come to mind that sort of help achieve that goal on the digital side?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like for example, within WGU Labs, and if you check out our website, you'll see our portfolio of companies that we've already, have invested in, and we have a couple more that we'll be announcing in the coming weeks. I'm really interested, and this is simply because my background when I went to graduate school, I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist. So, when I heard that we were going to be working with a company like Flourish Labs, for example, which actually supports peer counseling, right? And so wraparound services, like, again, providing some type of psychological intervention to students, either through peers like Flourish Labs or You Will, which is also a very popular online counseling company. So I think I'm very interested just to see over time what will happen. Like, will schools actually still continue to have their counseling center or school psychologists or clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, or will that actually be a service that they outsource, right, to a company like You Will or Flourish Labs or others? And I would say probably we need an interesting mix. But I think, the age of telemedicine, telecounseling, it's not going to go away, pandemic or no. I think that will continue to be important to track. I also think even some basic things, tutoring, right? Like, we kind of throw that out and just think that, yes, of course, tutoring, but there's still so many schools that are, I think, still relying on primarily an on-campus version of tutoring, and we know that many of our students are working students, right? So they're not going to be able to easily integrate into a tutoring schedule of a campus. And so how can we make that much more flexible? And so, so those are some of the things I think are interesting. And also one other thing, coaching. So, we've invested in companies like Lloyd and also a company called Go Coach, which was just rebranded as a company called Skill Cycle. And so I'm very bullish around, especially given the fact that the world of work and workforce development is a super hot topic for all of us. How can we actually provide coaching services to students, and not the traditional way where we basically said, hey, Matt, why don't you go to the Career Services Center, to get your resume looked at, but actually like pairing students with coaches that maybe even align with them in terms of affinity groups that students belong to, where they can actually get more detailed coaching support around a job, but maybe it's also about just other things. So taking the idea of the student success coach, but making it even broader to help a person make that transition from college to the world of work a little easier. So I'm very bullish about that as well. It's sorely needed, and again, telling students to go to career services on their own, I think that's a broken model. I think we need to be much more intentional about providing those services to students around their schedule, not around ours.
Sure. I mean, I think I'll let Matt and Calvin talk about a lot of the cool inventions. I'll just speak to kind of the headsets in the room and maybe when it's the best idea to look at a VR headset as something that could create efficiency or will have the most successful, utilization versus being something that's more for entertainment or ends up in a cupboard somewhere. And so some really good examples of where it makes sense to look at virtual reality headset could be when something's extremely dangerous, like in a lot of mining or trades or things when that learning outcome or what the students are trying to achieve, there's a dangerous factor. When it's incredibly expensive to do that in real life. So I know there's like some cadaver labs that are being done, and so that's a case where you would have access to something you wouldn't normally have, or tying into that when there's a high need for repetition for something. And so it either creates a safer space to have that repetition, or just the opportunity to do something that might normally need an in-person facilitator but could be done virtually. And then the last two are a bit more about space. I was actually here last year, a cool example of kind of some East Coast US universities doing lectures simultaneously with students that were in Africa, and they were getting access to the lessons that were here in a way that would be a lot easier versus a Zoom, which probably wouldn't be able to, as in the biology lab, would be a little bit more difficult to kind of facilitate that. And the last one is really interesting, or you might like with the psychological perspective, but I've been hearing for students that are either very introverted, students that are perhaps neurodiverse, as well as students that maybe unfortunately had something quite traumatic happen to them, but they find the space behind the avatar is a lot easier and allows them to have conversations they weren't able to have in person, or bridges to opportunities where they could have those conversations in person. So those are some criteria I would keep in mind for successful implementations of VR, because I know that's a bit of a debated topic sometimes.
Yeah, that's cool.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the Dear Colleague letter that came out a couple weeks ago, and maybe counterintuitively to what you'd expect from somebody who's spent a while in the investing world. I think my takeaway was it asks like a really important existential question of like, what should a university be doing and what should a partner be doing? Like the way that Ed is handling it is, well, we're going to start with, we just want to know who your partners are, which I think is fair. But I think it gets at this important question that we've kind of addressed piecemeal over the past kind of decade in ed tech, which is like, what are the specific functions that a university should own, and what are the specific functions that are okay to outsource? And how do you relay that to a student, which I don't think we've actually gotten that far yet. I think that's the next question, is like, what should students know explicitly versus implicitly? So I think that's like one of the more important questions that we still have to ask, and I think is relevant to this hybrid university that's, online, digital, and I guess third party. So I think that's something I'm kind of playing around with, and my initial kind of takeaway is we're probably going to have a lot more specialization, where you're going to see universities, you'll still have your mega universities, but I think we'll see smaller universities find specific lanes to focus on. And I know you have some great examples of this, of like, if you can find something that you can be great at, there's a way to grow your brand maybe even bigger than you were before. We're seeing local universities turn into regional and national players because they found something specific to hang on to and excel at. So that's what I'm kind of curious to watch. I would love to have you talk about them, because I know you know about some of the stuff they're doing with the XR labs in what were smaller universities that are now growing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if people want to look up a couple too, I'll also even throw a Canadian example in there. I didn't mention I'm from Canada, so I'll throw that. But if you want to look at like Lethbridge College in Alberta, they made an absolutely amazing START XR Innovation Center. And I believe it was about $1 million grant they got from the federal or provincial government as well to support that. And so they were really early adopters in XR. And to be fair, I know no Americans have probably heard of Lethbridge, but a lot of Canadians might not have heard of it as well. It's not one of the major cities in Canada, but in the VR space or ways that they've able to kind of stand themselves out, they've actually made quite a name for themselves. So one that might be worth doing a quick Google and seeing what they did and follow some of the breadcrumbs there.
And I just think it's a really big deal that like finding a new channel to be like, yeah, we are going to be the best in the world, like from what was more of a local university. So I just want to like add as many exclamation points to that as I can.
Yeah,
Or even
bold,
college.
underline, circle. Well, because I think it's like, and you can get it why there's like so much of sort of a like, what are my peers doing, keeping up with the Joneses kind of like vibe, that like not a lot of people, and certainly institutions, if they've been around for 200 years, want to necessarily take on a lot of risk. They're they're worried about potential liabilities or anything like that. But I think we're seeing with the laundry list of existential crises for higher education, of enrollment cliffs and chat GPTs and whatever else, like now is the time to sort of think through, like, how are we going to differentiate and kind of find our own lane. And it is interesting, just for a lot of stuff that mentioned is like, for counseling or health or career services and things like that, like, are the areas where there's always a little like bottlenecking of just sort of like a huge demand for services and just not a lot of staff availability. And I think that's why you see sometimes like the utilization just being like just chronically low, where it's just like not a lot of students use career services because it's just not, they're not even able to probably like get their head above water to be like doing anything proactively. They just kind of have to keep getting deluged by the fire hose of people just coming in. It's like we're just trying to keep up, but yeah, like that idea of how you can leverage tools, like the word I always use of sort of like supplementing or augmenting, that it isn't outsourcing, which is like you handle, like we can't, we're just going to like get rid of it. There's a lot of different tools that sort of really are able to digitally, support institutions and maybe just like streamline and simplify the systems and processes that they have and allow for staff and faculty to kind of get freed up, because you even see things like chatbots, that can do a lot of the addressing of the questions that might be, taking up a lot of staff members' time. And I'll give a little shout out. Pathify, my day job, they do work in this space too. So I think, we'll keep name dropping all these different companies that people can kind of check out and explore, where like there's just so many opportunities to kind of assess where you are, all maybe the new tools that you are working with and implementing, what's working, what's not, and how can we make everything work better together as we're embarking towards this hybrid frontier. Because like resources are going to be limited. You might be facing sort of an ambiguous, enrollment future. Certainly just even like shifting of where students are, like, and that's why you may need a right size, where it's just like, oh wow, there's way more demand for shorter term online self-paced options versus a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree or those sort of things. So I kind of wanted to get into that too, of just thoughts that people have had, because I think maybe it's kind of apparent, but we can just give it a few moments of focus here of sort of the financial impacts. Like you may be like moving resources and money and things around to right size, to adapt to your physical spaces and your digital infrastructure and everything. But we'll start down at the end, Matt, and come back down this way. But like what are the financial impacts of these sort of shifts that are going on, the context that we're in? Yeah,
I think we will probably see more news about this as kind of the COVID dollars work their way through the system and it becomes more critical to have sustainable financial operations. I think the interesting thing to me is where the partnerships in physical plant come in. So I think we saw, even before COVID, a lot of universities starting to let the dorms be built by, third parties, and the kind of dining hall services and those types of things, again, being handed off to other parties, which maybe that frees up resources to invest in digital things or to, build a certain area of practice. But And then, there's the kind of ever-present, like how many colleges are closing tracker lists. I'm not sure where that's going to go yet. I feel like it's we've been kind of sitting on the precipice for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, speaking to what Matt was referencing, when some of the dollars are going down, especially from COVID, I think I'll try and focus on the opportunity side coming from what I see of where maybe even companies are looking to invest as well. And I would say one example would be a bit of, I think you're saying partnership, the matchmaking of what you're looking to do and who might willing to fund that. And so saying a bit of the criteria of what a company could be looking for. I think like one of the great examples that if they're trying to build a talent pipeline, what they would like to see is where this is going all the way back, where there's perhaps a secondary school district that is really tightly integrated and working with either a college or a higher ed institution, and you're building that really strong pathway that goes all the way through. I like throwing out examples because I think there are some things that people can go back and look at later. And so I think that looking at the Bay Area's Community College Consortium, the BACCC, they've done a really amazing job, and they were able, this one does tie to Unity, but they were able to match to teaching a real-time 3D and kind of an XR pathway, but that was something that we were able to provide them grant funds for, and it was very interesting because they've integrated both the secondary school system and the higher ed system, and so for companies, that's something to think about as you're designing a program or where there would be interest to perhaps have opportunity to get some of those financial dollars when other areas are drying up.
To get that idea of like pulling those levers from foundations or government and all that, like because there is sort of a high need demand, because I think it might be because like, you work in the space and you're mentioning it like for a lot of examples, like for me, like a clarifying important point, like it's still pretty early days for a lot of stuff. Like, so it's like, if people are listening to this and be like, oh, well, it seems like everybody else is already doing it, right? Like I'm late to the party. It's like, no, that's what like people are like trying to like encourage and incentivize this kind of stuff. So like, because I think what we had talked about when we were planning is the idea of like, okay, find those places where you can plant the seeds that will just be a like luscious harvest, later on, because it's gonna be like, yeah, we've been doing this for like 5 years. Like, when other people are being like, oh, okay, I guess maybe I'll dip my foot in. It's like, you're ahead of the game. Like we're kind of blazing a trail here, and then you get to like, brag at conference about like, hey, our institution like chose to kind of maybe get out a little, of our comfort zone and do it also in collaboration with a good partner that could help us sort of, problem solve and troubleshoot and kind of, pave the way and everything. So I kind of wanted to clarify like my thought of like, no, this is still like sort of a nice wide open kind of vista here.
No, it's a great point. There are examples, but those are ones I'm pulling of like a best practice, and we're trying to hold on to those to show a lot of other people that a lot of these programs are only a couple years old with certain of these funding opportunities, both corporate or government. So there's tons of chance to get in there, be the one that plants the seeds, and be ahead of the game.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because I think, there's how many thousands of colleges and universities based on IPED's data, right? And to Matt's point, we're hearing of certain smaller schools at risk for closing. Again, if I had all the money in the world, one of the things as a VC person or philanthropist person, I would try to find a way for us to do a better job of actually reporting out in terms of what we're finding. Like our ecosystem is made up of a lot of different people, lots of different technologies. I don't think we do a great job, especially with our students, in terms of educating them about what's working, what's not working so well. Remember earlier I said something about end of the course surveys, right? But we know people kind of just fill those out as just, going through the motions. But I would love for there to be almost like a consortia where more schools can actually just say, in a safe space, right? Like, here are all the technologies in our ecosystem, right? Here are all the pilots that we're doing. Here's some of our initial data. We're finding these things are, our students like these services, face-to-face and online. These are the things that are maybe not working so well. But we need to do a better job of actually leaning more into showing our cards around what's working, what's not working. And it doesn't have to be at South by or, EDUCAUSE or any of the major conferences that many of us go to every year. I think there needs to be just more reporting out on that, just so that schools can make a more informed decision, right, about what they should invest in. And it's tough because, when you come to a conference, everyone's like, we're awesome, right? Like, we're doing all these cool things with different technologies or micro-credentials or apprenticeships or, all these things.
All
but,
buzzwords. Yeah.
Right, it's all buzzwords. And then we're kind of, we're only seeing a part of a much larger ecosystem in terms of creativity and so again, I'm kind of on a pulpit here bringing this up, but my hope is that the takeaway in which you're hearing too is that if you do work at a college or a university, continue to advocate for data collection around everything, right? Existing technologies, existing services, pilots, and don't be afraid to share that information out. Find a way to get outside of just doing it at a conference to look good, right? Like we all want that for affirmation, but we need to do a much better job of making our silos leakier. There's so much insights that we're missing out on when we don't do that, and I get it because it's a competitive space, but it's also not a zero-sum game. Like, again, no one school, even WGU, and we've had these conversations internally, and you've heard it from Scott Pulsifer, WGU is not going to solve everyone's problems, right? The mega universities individually won't be able to do that. It really takes all of us putting certain cards on the table and learning what's working, especially now when budgets are tighter, to make those better decisions about what's best for our students.
Yeah.
So.
Well, because what it made me think of what you're saying is like, acknowledging sort of like, like a humility of like, okay, we need to hear from our students. We need to really like, look under the hood, whatever kind of metaphors and just really investigate like, where are we? Where is maybe our resources going that's not as effective as it could or should be? What are students looking for that they don't have? And just like acknowledging that and like more frequently than just like once a year at whatever conference people go to like talk shop,
right.
Just being kind of candidly acknowledging those things and that we're, as institutional leaders like working on it. And I think what I hope for is that by going through this exercise of right sizing, one, like the choices that you're making of where you're investing your physical spaces and digital infrastructure is able to, better serve students. But theoretically, it's like if we're just like, okay, maybe we don't need to like expand physically, like those dollars could be put towards students or towards faculty staff compensation, like and just taking better care of our people and all those sort of things. So, and I would think that's something that any, organization, institution would aspire towards. But it is like an interesting moment because I think, my perception is that these schools that are closing and what I've heard in some like other podcasts and just like reporting on it is that they like almost like are too prideful. Like they're kind of just like, the ship is sinking and they're just sort of like, okay, let's just go down. Like they're not doing anything about it. They're just sort of going down because it's like, we don't want to change. We like, this is who we are. And if that's not what the market wants anymore, then like, all right, I guess like, they'll just go away. Cause then it's like, if they can sometimes be, candid and acknowledge like we need help or there's things that we want to be able to do that we can't. So we want to collaborate and merge maybe with another institution and those sort of things. So I think it's, just an interesting moment that you do have to kind of have a little bit of humility to kind of start to be open to the opportunity.
Right. It's like a Drake song, right? It's like I'm caught up in my feelings, right? And so there's lots of feelings, faculty unions, faculty senates, right? And so, so I please believe me when I say this, like I do understand that it's, what I'm suggesting is not happening in a vacuum. Like we do have to deal with a lot of stuff, a lot of drama within our own institutions. But to your point, can we be selfless enough to put the needs of our students before our own? And that's tough, right? Because at the end of the day, it's, there's a self-preservation individually as an institution, but again, our institutions exist because of our students, right? So what are we doing?
Well, I think what's complicated is I think of most universities as serving three kind of core pillars. The first is students, like you said. The second is research. Like obviously it varies and not every university does research, but usually there's students, research, and employment. They're economic engines for their local area. And I think what you see with the mega universities, which I think you would acknowledge makes it a little bit different in terms of your calculus, is you're mostly serving students. There's less research going on, and you are an economic engine, but you're a national economic engine. So I think what makes it really hard for the regional and even state universities is you still have to serve those other two masters, and that I don't think we've figured out how to translate. I think we've done a pretty good job on the student part because we've had the bigger online universities kind of lead the charge and show how you can serve students digitally in an effective way, in a financially sustainable way. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we have a great model for the research, and the serving local employment digitally is kind of an oxymoron. So I really have a lot of empathy for the university leaders that are trying to serve this in a time of really distinct change. I wish I had a better answer for how to navigate it.
That's a very good point to acknowledge, though, because that's certainly a blind spot that I thought of. It is that kind of the town and gown thing. Yeah. If an institution was just like hiring a bunch, but remotely, they might start getting the stink eye from the local mayor or something, where they're just like, what are you doing? Like, we want the tax revenue for here, not where that person lives halfway across the country or something, and that could just be where it starts to bristle, where it's like you'd have to, again, think through like, okay, what are the physical investments that we can make that are smart, like a makerspace that, creates a really great learning opportunity where it's like, okay, that does have people that are working in this space and, creating learning opportunities there versus, just going all in. Like it does need to be, and hence sort of the hybrid focus for this conversation. Like it needs to be that you're sort of throttling across all the different sort of areas where it's like, okay, well, this can be something that's like really well served by being, either entirely digital or mostly digital, and you've got maybe some remote staff members, and it's enabled us to like retain high quality talent to do the work that we need to do. But yeah, it's a good point of acknowledging them. Mm-hmm. So we are getting towards the end here. Yeah, I kind of had just like concluding thoughts. Certainly, we have time if anybody else sort of has final thoughts. I know for my podcast, we always have final thoughts or calls to action to inspire folks as we're wrapping up, and we'll have a few minutes for questions. But, in my mind, it is just that at overall kind of necessity of staying lean and adjusting to realistic and sustainable like size and maybe honestly even like gotten into like price, of like what you're charging for the institution, which, can be obviously determined by, the various investments and obligations and debt that you're taking on as you're, growing your institution, but, leaning into those differentiators and, making those smart, flexible digital investments and honestly starting to try to like trim the dead weight, like find those areas where it's just like, this really is not working out for us or for students anymore. So, and yeah, we already talked about institutions starting to close and merge and stuff. So you're seeing those kind of winners and losers sort of panning out. So we'll go back down. Kelvin, starting with you. Any final thoughts, calls to action for folks?
No, again, it's going to take, institutional knowledge across all of our institutions. We haven't talked today about HBCUs and MSIs and HSIs and, again, community colleges. So we need to, again, we need to encourage each other, I think, to collect better data, unpack what we've been doing all along. I'm a big fan, actually, of a K-12 tool called the Learn Platform, which actually helps schools, figure out what types of technologies their instructors are using. So I almost feel like we need a similar tool in higher ed to just help us, again, better understand the technology we're using, but also beyond that, the services, what's working, what's not working, and let's start doing a better job of, also updating the students in terms of where we are, right? So show them in a dashboard or regular reports, quarterly reports, how you're using data to actually make their lives better. I don't think we do a great job of that, and if we do, it's like end of the year. So I say, that's fine, but what about quarterly reports, right? Students are stakeholders. We're relying heavily on their tuition dollars. So why aren't we giving them updates about how we're using data to better understand their life circumstances and how we are making that better over time, hopefully. And if we're not, let's own up to that and say, oh yeah, we're doing a shitty job, excuse me for the podcast, but we can do better, right? We have to find a way to remind students that we're on their side, and not just wait to the end of the year to give them updates. Yeah. Let's update them regularly.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Perfect. I did want to underscore again there is a lot of opportunity in the space, and to mention what you just brought up as well, Calvin, in terms of equitable opportunity and ensuring that, luckily, Texas State is an HSI, so we did bring up one there, and there are other there are organizations that do have that vested interest in ensuring that not only, is there differentiation or it's a way for school to survive, but there is access for those that are underserved or underrepresented to ensure that they have the same opportunities as well. And so I just even throw another example out. Spelman College just made a great gaming minor that really focuses on a lot of these emerging technologies, and there was a lot of both corporate and other support for that. And so I think it is important, if you are serving those populations, to know that there is a lot of opportunity there as well, and there are a lot of organizations that have underscored that as a purpose. And so
I think for me it's providing more opportunities to talk about the different models that are happening in higher ed. So I think like we all know the co-op colleges. It's like Northeastern, Drexel, and Waterloo. It's like there's probably more, but I feel like the fact that we can pretty much name them is like good that those are known, but also sad that there's not more. And similar, like the work college, it's like Paul Quinn, Berea, and like I think there's one other. So I want to find ways to tell these stories of new models that are happening and what people are experimenting with, because I think it's really hard when you've been around for 200 years to experiment. My hope is that as these new types of models get talked about, it encourages more folks to try it, rather than going down with the ship is kind of a sad but maybe accurate metaphor.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of like a classical like painting or something. I don't know. Yeah. Like Old Captain.
Yeah, I want to tell those stories. So if you know of them, let me know.
Yeah. Well, because and like Northeastern is a good example, like acquiring other colleges, because like they know what their model is and what they want to do, and it like behooves them to sort of create sort of a national network of sites and things that they can sort of have like to kind of coordinate, I'm sure, business and co-op.
And it's so funny, they've been so tremendously successful with that co-op model, and yet we still have, a relative dearth of other colleges trying that. And it's not like it's easy, but, when you have this example, like I would love to see more follow suit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great calls to action. Appreciate everybody on the panel here sharing all their thoughts and everything. But we do have time, just roughly about like 9 minutes or so. Folks want to shout out any questions to all of us or any of us. Certainly have some space to do that. Anybody got things on their mind, burning questions?
Yeah, Matt, this is specifically for you, though, and anybody else can comment as well. You asked about the recent Dear Colleague letter and saying, what should the university own as part of their operations, and what should go elsewhere? When I think about partnerships with companies to build those niches out, it raises that very question for me. There is a lot of potential risk involved in partnering. How can a university be aware of those risks of partnership and make sure they're owning what they should own while bringing that partnership?
So maybe I'll just repeat it so it's hearable on a podcast. So, and correct me if I get this wrong, but how should a university evaluate the risk of building something themselves versus using a partner to help provide a service? Is that fair? So I think it varies by the service. I think in some ways it's pretty well known. So like teaching and learning, we've got a whole industry of OPMs, and like most OPMs will give you like hey, this is probably what it would cost you to build this, and here's what it would cost you to do it with us, and here's what it looks like with RevShare for at least the next like 3 to 6 months, and then here's what it looks like for fee for service. So I think that's like pretty established, and like I think most of them are being pretty honest, and it's what do you as a university have in terms of financial capacity to like fund something yourself versus do it via a partner. I think there's also, for like physical plant, there's usually like real estate private equity funds that will do a similar run through with you. So this is probably not as specific an answer as you want, but I think a lot of it comes down to vision and says like, what do you as a university leader think is core to your mission as a university? And, I think there's a lot of ways to get a national service out of it. So for coaching or tutoring, you can get that nationally. Do you specifically feel like you have a way to add value to tutoring on campus or digitally via your specific type of personnel? So one of the things I coach entrepreneurs on, I usually a question early stage entrepreneurs ask is like, should we be B2B or B2C? Do we sell to other businesses or do we recruit consumers? And I'm like, well, you have 3 team members. Like, what are the skills that your team members have? Like, if your team is all people who have done business to consumer, like, don't build a business to business go-to-market motion. If your team is all business to business salespeople, like, don't build a consumer sales function. Right. So I think what I would do is I would look at the staff that you have and like what their skill set is and align your vision to that and say, this is what we think we can do uniquely on our campus. And like, I can't guarantee that will work, but at least then you're trying to leverage the people that you have to do something unique and interesting.
Because I feel like the simplest fork in the road that I think institutions get at for this kind of stuff is like, do we want somebody else to do it, or like, are we going to have a tool that augments us to do it ourselves? Like, that tends to be where it's like, do we want to have somebody from BetterHelp counsel our students, or do we want to try to figure out some way to augment our counselors to be able to serve more students or serve students more efficiently? And because I think like tutoring is another good example where it's like, do we want a tool that just helps us manage our tutoring center, or do we want to outsource to Wisant to just have students go there and get tutoring from anybody? So it's just like, that's sometimes like the simplest fork in the road, and it's just sort of an existential question that obviously institutions can change their mind, but sometimes it's like they're presented with that option. And they're like, I don't know, I just don't like that risk of a student going off to getting tutored by someone else.
And to be clear, like, that should vary by university.
Right.
And by the skill set that university has. I think that's really like, Columbia Teachers College, like, probably is pretty good at tutoring. But like, maybe they're not equipped to build their own LMS. It's a facetious example, but I really think it should vary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always going to come down to like also on the vendor side too in schools. Like, schools want partners, not vendors. Right? So if you are a vendor, it behooves you to, again, sell without selling, right? Don't come at schools saying, oh, we can, like the Tina Turner song, like, I'll be your private dancer. I'll do anything for you. Like,
it's 2 musical references.
I know, I'm not doing a great job with those, but you get my point, right? Like, there are many companies that try to like overwhelm schools and say, oh, we can do anything you want, whatever. But in some ways, be humble, right? As a company, be hungry, right? Be entrepreneurial, but be humble as well, and say what your limitations are. Say what's going to actually be, acknowledge that maybe you have more things on your future roadmap versus things that are actually available today.
It is definitely on the roadmap. I just want to confirm that.
Right.
It's there.
Right. But schools want to know who they're truly working with. And then schools, if you're a school, do your due diligence and then some, right? Talk to as many other schools that are partnering with whatever companies, especially on the OPM side. Make sure you're not signing up with a Demons contract where you're locked in for like 20 plus years. And think about it similar to what Dustin mentioned too. Think about the bigger picture. So maybe working with an OPM helps you in the short term, but think about how hopefully you can reinvest in yourself to then say, OPM, it's been great working with you. We have it from here. We're going to, continue to move the needle forward ourselves because we see value here. We're going to reinvest. Maybe we're not going to build another 20 buildings, but instead we'll take that money to actually do the job ourselves. So, again, easier said than done.
Yeah, I appreciate. We kind of took it from both perspectives there on that kind of conversation. So, any other questions? I feel like we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more.
I'm wondering if you've seen any institutions that kind of on the brink potentially of going out of business or maybe headed that way, that have physical campuses that have been able to get creative and divest of infrastructure, lease that infrastructure out. Because when I think about the technology side of it, it's easy to say, okay, we don't need that $10,000 technology, it's nice to have. We don't need that technology. Those are such tiny cuts in the budget.
Right.
About saving the institution.
Right.
And if you get 5,000 cuts, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 3 buildings or labs that we
There's one that I'm not going to name, but I think they like sold most of their campus to some like crypto entrepreneur to throw like crypto retreats. So that's like a strategy you could pursue. It was, probably easier to do in like 2020 and 2021 than now. But one institution that is not failing that I think is doing this in a really compelling way is Colby College. They're in, they're way up there in Maine, and they have said, to my point about the kind of local economy conundrum, they've said, well, what can we offer that would compel people to come up here? And so they've rebuilt a lot of the downtown around co-working spaces, and they're trying to attract remote workers. And they're less online as a college, but they're trying to say we can pull people up here if we do these kinds of interesting things downtown. And we have the endowment, which again, not everybody has, to be able to invest in our kind of local economy in this way. So I think they're a good example. I don't know, you see like Penn and Northeastern investing in campuses around the country. I can't think of like a failing school that sold off a chunk and then was, not failing anymore. Do you guys have?
No.
It's not even, and we have to wrap up, but the only thing that, because I wrote on this topic recently, and University of Akron got a lot of headlines, and it was less so, I think, of like physical space. They may have had some changes there, but like they were just making really dramatic cuts, and a lot of people were like, whoa, like what is going on? But like, I think they're positioning themselves and planting those seeds and doing all this stuff that we talked about of like building the largest esports facility in the entire country and just being like, these programs aren't cutting it, we're gonna have to get rid of them. And like they've just, I think, had clearly some really hard conversations, but I think for me, I'm seeing that as like, they kind of have the courage to try again versus just sort of, riding off into the sunset and just kind of like, not really being innovative. But
and maybe the PASSY system, I don't know, over time, given that within the Pennsylvania system of higher education, there are some schools that have merged. So I don't know if some of those campuses are starting to sell off some of their land. That might be worth looking into as well.
Or just not growing their footprint.
Yeah, right.
All right, we're not buying any more buildings. But
right.
So appreciate the questions. Appreciate everybody coming out. Appreciate my panelists for having an awesome conversation. And even though it's the last day, hopefully folks just enjoy the rest of their time here in Austin and the conference.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tiers, Jamie Hunt, Corinne Myers, Jamie Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.